This is what we find amongst the muhaddithin. And Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has one narration in his Sahih. And there are a few narrators in Bukhari regarding whom some of the later muhaddithun did kalam. They said, okay, why did Imam Bukhari specifically bring these narrators, even though these are questionable narrators? And one of them is a very interesting narrator by the name of Ubayy ibn Abbās. Ubayy ibn Abbās. And Bukhari only has one hadith that he's brought with this narrator in the chain in his entire Sahih. And if you look at the majority of the scholars of hadith, they say this narrator is da'if. The question is, okay, how did Imam Bukhari bring a hadith in his book where the narrator is considered da'if according to the majority of the muhaddithun? So we look at the content. Number one, what was the narration about? Their narration was regarding the name of the horse of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like, is that a big deal? Is no. Answer is, number one, just the content of the narration, just the name of the horse of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we have other narrations where we realize that, okay, this individual, Ubayy ibn Abbās, he's actually the grandson of a companion. And him and his brother were narrators, but they were weak narrators. But that horse actually was kept in their home. That is where it was kept. Or a few horses. And therefore they're narrating regarding the horse that was in their home. And they're narrating from their grandfather who's there, who's the companion. So, is it that big of a deal, for example, that Imam Bukhari narrated this hadith? I don't think so. In Jamia, when I was graduating, this was one of the research papers that I wrote regarding this one companion. And why did Imam Bukhari bring him in his Sahih? Around 60 pages I gathered just regarding this one companion. Different scholars that have different opinions regarding him as to whether he's authentic or not authentic. And also serving all of his ahadith and why they arrived at the conclusion that he's considered not authentic. And then after that, why did Imam Bukhari narrate him in his Sahih? Why did Imam Bukhari still give preference to bringing this hadith in his Sahih? And there were three main reasons that I came across, or in total I gathered in the end. Three main reasons as to why Imam Bukhari was willing to narrate using this narrator in his Sahih. The first one is because even regarding whether he's weak or not, there is a bit of leeway in that. Some scholars consider him authentic. Some scholars consider him acceptable. Not authentic, but acceptable. And the problem is that he is, I know we're going on a tangent, but it's fine, inshallah. La bas. He is what we call from the muqillin. Muqillin basically are those narrators that have very few ahadith. Now when it comes to a narrator, how are you supposed to determine that he's weak or authentic? The way you determine that he's strong or weak in his memorization and his dabt is that you have to survey all of his narrations. And you cross-compare them with the narrations of strong students of the same teachers that he is narrating from. So for example, there's a few teachers that are famous, and there's a lot of strong narrators that narrate the hadith in a specific way. Now we have a question regarding Fulan. How do we figure out whether he actually is authentic and he memorized majority of the times versus not memorizing majority of the times? What we do is we gather all of his narrations, and then you cross-compare. In the majority of his narrations, is he doing muwafaqa? Is he in line with the narration of the thiqat? Or is he not in line with the narrations of the thiqat? If he is, then we say, okay, that shows that his dabt, his retainment, his memorization was also strong. If he's not, then we're like, okay, wait, he's making mistakes. And the more mistakes that are shown, the more his level of retainment, we realize that his level of retainment is weaker. Like, what's the problem? How do you apply this process to a rawi that only gives you 2-3 narrations? And he's only narrated through 3, 4, 5, 6 narrations. That's it. Nothing else. So someone who is muqil, and he doesn't have a lot of narrations. We know who he is. We know his name. We know when he lived. All of that we know. But we don't find that he narrated a lot of ahadith. How are you supposed to arrive at a conclusion regarding how his retainment is? So if he's only narrated 3 ahadith, or 4 ahadith, or 5 ahadith, how do we arrive at a conclusion? And this is the main issue with this narrator, Ubayy ibn Abbās. Yani he doesn't have a lot of ahadith. Some mention 7, some mention 8, but in reality, even when you get picky regarding those, then you realize that it's only like 3-4 narrations that he actually has. Other than that, it's not correct to attribute the mistakes in the other narrations that are attributed towards him to him. So we're looking at 3-4 narrations. And out of those 3-4 narrations, 2 of them he got it right. And one of them is contested based on whether we consider him acceptable or not. So even from a hadith perspective, there are some scholars of hadith that actually considered him acceptable based on this, based on the fact that he is muqil and so on and so forth. But overall, majority of the scholars of hadith considered him weak. They consider him weak. So that's the first reason why Imam Bukhari could have potentially brought him in his Sahih, is the fact that he is muqil, and if you really look into it a bit more detailed, then you realize that he has too little narrations to be able to determine that he's making mistakes. And every single time there is a mistake that occurs in his narration, the problem is that the ones who narrated from him were also problematic. So how do we get to his narration? What's the chain between us, for example, or the scholar in the 3rd century and Ubayy ibn Abbās? You have to look at that chain as well, right? So if the chain over there's weak narrators, then how can you say that he was the one who made the mistake? What if it was one of the other ones that came after him? So in 2 of his narrations, for example, the rawi from him is Al-Waqidi. Al-Waqidi is also considered weak. And he's the only one narrating this hadith from Ubayy ibn Abbās. Al-Waqidi. So now when you're going to say that there was a mistake made, why are you putting it on him and not putting it on Al-Waqidi? Both of them are equally weak. If you're claiming he's weak, why are you claiming he's the one who made the mistake and it wasn't Al-Waqidi who made the mistake? Al-Waqidi, according to you, is also weak. So now, even determining, how many mistakes he has is problematic. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that I basically mentioned was that the narration he's narrating is not, the content of it is not something regarding ahkam and aqaid. So it's something which is, yutasahal fi. It's not something so complicated. It's not something which is so complicated. The content, and that's based on the statement of Al-Iraqi and the tariqah of the muhaddithin, that we say وَسَهَلُوا فِي غَيْرِ مَوْضُوعٍ رَوْا مِنْ غَيْرِ تَبِينِ ضَعْفٍ وَرَاءٍ. And the third reason is that this same narration is narrated by both brothers. Ubayy ibn Abbās, and he had a brother. And they both mentioned the names of the horses of the Messenger because they used to be inside they were kept in their own home. So most likely what they're talking about is something which they would have remembered and they would have known. Okay, if you're growing up as a child and again, this is the horse of the Messenger, and it's being kept in your home, and you're growing up as a child and you're being told, oh, this horse belonged to the Messenger, or there was a horse of the Messenger in our home that was called so and so. You're not going to forget these type of things. It's not a place where you would be making mistakes. Okay, and especially if both brothers are narrating the same thing, even if both of them are weak normally in a hadith, but when it comes to this type of narration, it seems like they would get it right. Okay, so for these 3 reasons, it makes sense to actually consider it fine and acceptable. And that's why we say, I've said this before many times, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, so there are levels to studying a hadith, right? Obviously, we say overall Imam Bukhari's book is the most authentic book after the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the beauty of Imam Bukhari is that he does something which is called intiqa. What is intiqa? Intiqa is where he is selecting narrations. And he's so good at it. Like he's able to, let's say for example, the way you would give an analogy for this is we would say that, imagine you have wires, for example, that are tangled. Or for example, you have wool, for example. And there's like a needle inside and you're trying to separate it, right? Extract it, remove it. Imam Bukhari is able to do this in a very beautiful manner. So there are so many narrations and a lot of them are problematic, and he's able to go inside and take the most beautiful, amazing, perfect, clean version and remove it and extract it from all of them and say, okay, here you go. This was the beauty of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala. And this is before we had computers and all these programs that we could use to search these narrations. He was able to do this by way of his memory, how much understanding he had regarding these narrations. He would go inside and be able to select very specific narrations, and he would narrate them in very specific ways. Very, very specific ways. واضح? And there's so many examples of this in Sahih Bukhari. So anyhow, what I was saying is all of this was because we mentioned that these lines are attributed towards Hassan ibn Thabit, even though we don't have authentic chains for them. Does that mean we need to automatically say 100% he didn't say it? Of course not. Of course not. He could have very easily said them. And Allahu A'lam. As far as the meaning is concerned, 100% the meaning is correct. And we're going to solidify this using other narrations from other companions. What's the line? لما نظرت إلى أنواره سطعت وضعت من خيفة كفي على بصري.